The cell stank of oil and fear, its walls etched with claw marks from prisoners who had begged for mercy before their end. Nathan Cole sat chained to the cold metal floor, his wrists raw from the biting cuffs. He had been dragged from the ruins of his mining camp and thrown here without explanation. His body bruised, but his spirit refusing to break. He wasn't sure if he was more furious at his captors or at himself for surviving when others hadn't. Through the bars, alien guards with segmented armor and glowing eyes paced in silence. Their movements were almost mechanical, their heads jerking side to side as if sniffing for weakness. Nathan had never seen their kind before the raid, but their brutality was clear in every motion. He clenched his jaw, refusing to look away when one of them locked eyes with him, their stare glowing red in the dim light. The chains rattled as he straightened, his defiance burning even as fear gnawed at him. The door opened with a shriek and two figures entered. One was tall, cloaked in ceremonial garb, her skin the deep violet of dusk. She moved with a cold grace, the sword at her hip gleaming like a shard of lightning. The other was a smaller robed elder, their eyes sunken but alert, carrying a tablet covered in alien glyphs. Nathan realized this was no ordinary prison visit. This was judgment. The violet-skinned warrior stepped closer and the guards bowed in eerie unison. She reached down, gripping Nathan's chin with surprising strength, forcing him to look up. Her eyes were a swirling silver, unreadable yet terrifying. "Human," she said, her voice carrying both contempt and curiosity. "You breathe in the Empire's shadow without leave. That crime alone demands death." Her words cut like ice, but Nathan met her gaze without flinching. Nathan wanted to spit in her face, but his throat was too dry. Instead, he whispered hoarsely, "If you're going to kill me, get on with it." The elder behind her hissed in disapproval, but the warrior didn't strike. She studied him as though measuring his worth. For a moment, silence pressed heavy in the chamber. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she drew her sword, its edge glowing with humming energy. Nathan braced himself, but she stopped short of his throat, hovering just a breath away. The elder spoke sharply in their tongue, the glyph tablet pulsing with light. Nathan couldn't understand the words, but their tone was clear. They were debating his fate. He caught fragments in broken translation, words like trial, defiance, and spectacle. He realized with dawning dread that they didn't just want to kill him, they wanted to use him. He was to be paraded, humiliated, broken for the crowd's amusement. The warrior released his chin and shoved him back, the chains clattering loudly. "You will not die today," she declared, her voice echoing in the cell. "The Empire will watch as your spirit is tested. They believe you will break as all slaves do. I'm not so certain." Nathan's heart pounded as her words sank in. It wasn't mercy, it was a sentence to a slower death. But the flicker of doubt in her tone struck him as strange. Dragged through the halls of the fortress, Nathan glimpsed towering spires through barred windows. Ships streaked across a smog-filled sky while alien citizens bustled below in glittering robes and steel masks. He saw no joy in their movements, only discipline and fear. This wasn't just a society, it was a machine, and he had been thrown into its gears. The guards shoved him forward until he stumbled into the glaring light of an arena. The stadium roared with alien voices, layered in clicks and hisses that made Nathan's skin crawl. Thousands of glowing eyes watched him, their gazes predatory and expectant. The floor beneath his boots was scorched from past battles, the sand stained dark with blood. Across the arena, cages rattled, holding beasts he couldn't begin to name. Some with horns like steel, others with wings folded tight against armored hides. His gut clenched at the realization. He was the entertainment. The violet warrior appeared above, standing in a balcony lined with banners of silver and black. She raised her sword and the crowd fell silent. "Behold the human," she announced, her voice amplified by unseen speakers. "An intruder, a trespasser, a thief of air and soil." The audience hissed, their disdain washing over Nathan like heat. She continued, "He will prove his worth or perish for your glory." The crowd erupted again, their hunger for violence deafening. Nathan's chains were released, replaced with crude leather bindings on his wrists. A spear was thrust into his hand, its shaft splintered and uneven. He almost laughed at the absurdity. It wasn't a weapon, it was a mockery. The gates opposite him screeched open and something massive emerged, its shadow stretching long across the sand. It was a beast unlike anything he had seen. Four-legged armored scales shimmering with oily colors, and jaws that crackled with sparks of energy. Fear surged through Nathan, raw and primal, but something else rose with it. Anger. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't chosen to be dragged into their empire, their games, their twisted sense of justice. He was a miner, a man who worked with his hands and bled for his living, but he would not die on his knees for their amusement. He tightened his grip on the spear, planting his feet as the beast roared. The ground shook as the creature charged, its claws digging deep into the sand. Nathan dodged instinctively, rolling hard to the side. The crowd jeered, their laughter echoing at his clumsy movements. He scrambled up, sweat and grime sticking to his skin, and barely managed to bring the spear up in time to deflect a swipe from the beast's talons. The impact rattled his bones, nearly sending him sprawling. The warrior above watched intently, her silver eyes never leaving him. Nathan caught the faintest shift in her expression, not amusement but curiosity. It gave him a spark of resolve. He wasn't just fighting for his life. He was defying their expectations. He wanted them to see that humans did not break so easily, no matter the odds stacked against them. The beast circled him, sparks flickering in its jaws, its breath hot and acrid. Nathan's chest heaved as he tried to think, to plan. The spear was worthless against its armored hide, but its eyes, yes, the eyes were softer, vulnerable. He forced himself to breathe steady, to focus despite the crowd's roar. If he could blind it, maybe he had a chance. The creature lunged again, this time faster, its jaws snapping shut inches from his torso. Nathan twisted, thrusting the spear upward with all his strength. The tip scraped across one of the beast's eyes, not piercing but drawing a furious screech. The arena trembled with the sound, the crowd roaring in approval of his boldness. Nathan stumbled back, adrenaline surging like fire in his veins. Pain flared in his side as the beast's tail whipped him, sending him crashing into the sand. His ribs screamed, his vision blurring, but he forced himself up, coughing blood. The spear was cracked now, splintered from the impact, but he refused to let go. He staggered forward, limping but determined. The beast growled low, blood leaking from its grazed eye. Above, the warrior leaned forward slightly, her lips tightening. Nathan realized she wasn't cheering for the beast. She was studying him, waiting. For what, he didn't know. But in that instant, her doubt became fuel. He wasn't just going to survive. He was going to make her question everything she believed about humans. The beast roared one final time and charged, faster and more desperate. Nathan dropped to one knee, bracing the broken spear like a pike. As the creature bore down on him, he screamed every ounce of rage and defiance in his chest, driving the weapon upward. The impact split wood, flesh and bone, and the arena filled with the thunder of the beast's death cry. Silence fell over the crowd as the massive body collapsed, twitching, then stilled. Nathan knelt there, gasping, covered in blood that wasn't his own. His hands shook, his body broken, but he lifted his head defiantly. He met the silver gaze of the warrior above, and for a fleeting moment he thought he saw respect flicker in her eyes. The silence shattered into an uproar, the alien crowd shrieking in disbelief. Nathan let the broken spear fall from his hand, his chest heaving. He was alive, against all odds, against their expectations, against the empire itself. And in that moment, chained, wounded, and surrounded by enemies, he had never felt more human. The aftermath of the battle left Nathan barely standing, but the roar of the crowd carried him like a wave. He didn't feel victorious. His body screamed in pain, his lungs burned, and his ribs ached with every breath. Yet there was something fierce and undeniable in the way he stood over the beast's corpse. For a moment, he wasn't a slave, wasn't prey. He was a challenger. That realization set the stadium ablaze with noise, some voices shouting praise, others demanding his death for such insolence. Guards stormed the arena, their metallic armor glinting under the alien sun. They moved like predators closing in, weapons at the ready. Nathan expected a spear through his back or a blade across his throat, but instead they encircled him carefully, as though afraid he might lash out again. The crowd hissed in disapproval when no execution came. With rough hands, the guards seized his arms, dragging him toward the gates. He stumbled but did not resist, forcing himself to stay upright, to not give them the satisfaction of seeing him collapse. Above, the violet-skinned warrior lowered her sword and turned to the elder. Their exchange was heated, her silver eyes narrowing while the elder jabbed at the glowing glyph tablet. The debate was brief but intense, ending with her raising her hand to silence him. Nathan caught only the smallest glimpse of her expression as the gates closed behind him. There was no contempt now, only calculation. Inside the fortress corridors, the noise of the arena dulled to a hollow hum. Nathan was dragged through narrow halls lit by faint strips of light, the air heavy with metal and incense. The guard's grip was iron, and every step sent fresh pain through his battered frame. His vision swam, but he forced himself to stay conscious, refusing to black out. He wanted to see where they would take him, what new trial awaited. They didn't return him to the cell. Instead, he was brought into a chamber far larger, lined with dark stone pillars carved with alien runes. Torches burned with a blue flame, casting ghostly shadows that danced along the walls. In the center stood the warrior herself, waiting with her sword resting casually at her side. The elder stood nearby, glaring at Nathan as though his very existence was an insult. The guards shoved him forward and left, the massive doors closing behind with a heavy thud. Nathan's knees threatened to buckle, but he steadied himself, locking eyes with the warrior. She studied him in silence for a long moment, as if weighing her next words carefully. Finally, she spoke. "You should not be alive. No human should have lasted more than seconds against a Kevlar beast. And yet," she tilted her head, her silver eyes narrowing. "You endured." Nathan's voice was hoarse but steady. "Guess you underestimated me." The elder hissed, outraged at his insolence, but the warrior raised a hand to silence him again. She took a step closer, circling him slowly, her gaze sharp as a blade. He could feel the weight of her scrutiny, as though she were peeling back layers of his soul to see what lay beneath. "You fight with desperation, not skill," she said. "Yet desperation has its own power. It has kept entire species alive against extinction." She stopped in front of him, lifting her chin slightly. "Tell me, human, what is your name?" The question startled him. None of them had cared to ask before. "Nathan," he answered after a pause, his voice rasping. "Nathan Cole." She repeated the name softly, almost testing its sound on her tongue, then nodded once. "Nathan Cole," she said, louder now as though committing it to memory. "You will not return to the cells. You will be tested again, but not as a prisoner, as something more." The elder bristled, his voice rising sharply in their language. Nathan couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. He was furious. The warrior cut him off coldly, her hand resting lightly on her sword. Her tone left no room for argument. The elder scowled but bowed slightly, muttering curses as he retreated into the shadows. Nathan watched, bewildered, as the balance of power shifted before his eyes. The warrior gestured, and attendants entered the chamber, carrying trays of strange fruits, meats, and a basin of glowing water. They set it all down before Nathan and stepped back. His stomach twisted with hunger at the sight of food, but suspicion gnawed at him. Poison, a test of obedience? Still, his body was on the verge of collapse. With a slow, defiant glare, he reached for a piece of fruit and bit into it. The taste was sharp, alien, but nourishing. The warrior's lips curved almost imperceptibly, as if she approved of his choice. "Strength must be restored if you are to serve the Empire's trials," she said. Nathan swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he ate. Every bite renewed his determination. If they thought they could break him with food and kindness, they were wrong. He would take what he needed to survive, but his defiance would not waver. After he had eaten, the attendants guided him to the basin of water. It pulsed faintly, its glow casting strange patterns across his skin. When he dipped his hands in, the ache in his wrists eased, and when he splashed it across his bruised ribs, the pain dulled. He gasped softly, realizing it wasn't just water, it was healing. His body still bore the weight of exhaustion, but the worst of his injuries began to fade. The warrior stepped closer, her presence commanding. "You will fight again soon," she said. "Not beasts this time, warriors." Her eyes bore into him, testing his reaction. "Will you endure, Nathan Cole? Or will you fall like the rest?" Nathan met her gaze, refusing to show weakness. "If you want me to fight," he said, "then know this, I don't fight for your empire. I fight because I refuse to die for your amusement." His words echoed in the chamber, bold and reckless. For a moment, silence stretched thin between them. Then, to his shock, the warrior smiled faintly. A sharp, dangerous smile. "Good," she said softly. "That is what makes you worth watching." The attendants dressed Nathan in simple but sturdy garments, better than the rags he had been given in the cell. The fabric was rough but functional, made for battle. They strapped light armor across his chest and arms, though it felt more ceremonial than protective. The warrior gave him a long look, then turned and strode toward the doors. "Tomorrow the trials begin," she said. Rest while you can. Nathan was led to a chamber not of chains but of stone walls and a single narrow bed. It was no luxury, but compared to the cell, it was paradise. As the door sealed behind him, he sat on the bed, his mind racing. He had survived the arena. He had earned their attention. But what did it mean? What game was the warrior playing? He lay back, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words. She saw something in him, something she didn't expect. And though he didn't yet know what she wanted, he knew one thing for certain. He could not let her be the one to define him. If he was to endure the trials, it would be on his terms. For humanity, for those who had fallen, for his own pride. The murmur of the alien city filtered faintly through the walls, a constant reminder of the empire that surrounded him. But Nathan did not feel crushed by it. For the first time since his capture, he felt the spark of possibility. They thought him a spectacle. They thought him a pawn. But in the shadows of their empire, a seed of rebellion had taken root. Sleep eventually claimed him, though his dreams were restless. Images of the Kevlar beast, of the crowd's jeers, of the warrior's silver eyes swirled in his mind. He woke more than once, drenched in sweat. But each time he reminded himself he was still alive. And so long as he drew breath, he still had the chance to defy them. As dawn's light filtered faintly through the slit in the wall, Nathan sat upright on the bed. His body ached, but his resolve had hardened like iron. Whatever trial awaited, he would not break. They had stolen his freedom, but they could not take his will. And soon enough, they would learn what it meant to face a human who refused to kneel. The morning came not with warmth, but with a horn's blaring note that rattled Nathan's bones. Guards stormed into his chamber, their armor clattering with precise rhythm. They didn't need to speak. One gestured with a spear, and Nathan rose, stiff but defiant. He refused to show hesitation, even as his muscles screamed. If they wanted him broken, they'd have to do far more than drag him from bed. The corridors twisted endlessly, their walls etched with glowing sigils that pulsed faintly like veins under skin. He felt the weight of eyes on him from shadowed alcoves, whispers in the alien tongue trailing behind him. It was as though every step he took was a ripple in their empire, and they watched with a fascination they barely concealed. He was no longer just another slave. He was something else now, something dangerous. When the doors opened to the trial chamber, Nathan's breath caught. This was no arena of beasts. It was a coliseum, vast and towering, with tiers upon tiers of aliens pressed shoulder to shoulder. Above, banners of violet and silver shimmered, catching the alien sunlight. The roar of the crowd was deafening, not just anticipation, but bloodlust. They weren't here for survival. They were here for spectacle, for glory. At the center of the arena stood 4 figures, armored from head to toe in gleaming plates that reflected the light like fire. They bore weapons longer than Nathan's entire body, their forms massive and inhumanly graceful. Warriors, champions bred for battle, their every movement honed to perfection. Nathan's throat tightened. This wasn't a test of endurance. This was execution masked as entertainment. The warrior woman stood at the high dais above, flanked by the elder. Her silver eyes gleamed as she watched him enter, her expression unreadable. Nathan met her gaze for a fleeting moment, feeling her scrutiny like a blade against his skin. He wondered if she had orchestrated this herself, to see if the human who defied death could defy warriors too. The announcer's voice boomed across the Colosseum, the alien words indecipherable but heavy with intent. The crowd erupted, stamping their feet in unison until the very ground shook. The warriors raised their weapons in salute, their armor catching the light in a dazzling display. Nathan stood bare by comparison, armed only with a crude blade that felt more like a mockery than a weapon. The signal was given, and the first warrior charged. The ground trembled under his massive strides, his weapon arcing downward with terrifying force. Nathan barely rolled aside, the blade shattering stone where he had stood. Dust filled his lungs and his ears rang, but instinct propelled him to his feet. He swung his crude blade in desperation, the strike glancing harmlessly off the warrior's armor. It was like striking a wall of iron. The second warrior closed in, a spear thrusting forward with lethal precision. Nathan twisted, feeling the spear graze his side, tearing fabric and skin alike. Pain seared through him, but he gritted his teeth, shoving himself against the spear shaft and forcing his way closer. He slammed the hilt of his blade against the warrior's visor, the impact doing little more than staggering the giant for half a heartbeat. But that half-heartbeat was survival. The crowd roared in fury and amusement, their voices blending into a chaotic storm. Nathan's lungs burned, his muscles trembled, but his mind sharpened with each near miss. He couldn't match their strength, couldn't pierce their armor, but he could endure. And endurance was its own weapon. Every dodge, every desperate strike bought him another breath, another second of life. The third warrior entered the fray, twin blades flashing in a deadly rhythm. Their strikes were too fast, too precise. Nathan stumbled backward, his crude sword shattering under the relentless assault. He hit the ground hard, dust choking him as the crowd surged in noise. The warrior raised both blades for the final strike, and Nathan's death felt imminent. But instinct, that human stubbornness born from centuries of survival, erupted. Nathan grabbed a shard of his broken blade and drove it upward as the warrior descended. The shard wedged into a gap between the plates, shallow but enough to make the warrior recoil. A roar of outrage swept the Colosseum, but Nathan didn't waste the moment. He rolled free, gasping, clutching the shard like a lifeline. The fourth warrior moved at last, calm and deliberate, as though studying Nathan rather than rushing to kill him. Their blade gleamed wickedly, every step measured. Nathan knew this one was different, the strongest, the most skilled. The others had been warm-up, a slow execution. This was the executioner. The battle slowed into a deadly dance. Every strike forced Nathan to the edge of his limits, every dodge shaved seconds from his endurance. His body screamed, his mind burned, but somewhere deep inside something primal awoke. He remembered Earth stories, of warriors who fought impossible odds, of underdogs who stood when the world said they should fall. He remembered that humanity's strength wasn't in strength at all. It was in refusal. He began to fight not as prey but as a human. He ducked lower than expected, moved faster than exhaustion should have allowed, struck not where armor was strong but where balance faltered. He fought dirty, unpredictable, using dust, stone, even the shards of his broken weapon as tools. The crowd shifted from jeers to stunned silence, then back to roars that were half outrage, half awe. Blow after blow rained down, but Nathan refused to die. Blood slicked his arms. His legs buckled, yet he pushed back with every ounce of defiance in him. The fourth warrior finally faltered, a stumble so slight most wouldn't have noticed. But Nathan noticed. With a scream that tore his throat raw, he lunged, driving the shard deep into the exposed joint behind the warrior's knee. The giant staggered, collapsing onto one side. The Colosseum erupted in chaos. Some screamed for blood, others for mercy. Nathan stood panting, drenched in sweat and blood, his body moments from collapse. He had not won, not truly, but he had not lost, and that alone was a victory none had expected. The warrior woman on the dais rose to her feet, her silver eyes blazing. For the first time her lips curved, not into mockery but into something almost like respect. The elder shouted furiously at her side, his voice carrying even over the crowd, but she silenced him with a single gesture. Her gaze never left Nathan. Guards rushed into the arena, forming a barrier around him. This time they didn't drag him like an animal. They surrounded him like a prize. Nathan, gasping for air, barely kept his balance as they led him from the blood-stained sands. His body was broken, his mind frayed, but his spirit burned like fire. Inside the fortress walls, whispers followed him. Slaves turned their heads as he passed, eyes wide with something new. Hope. The guards kept their grips tight, but even they seemed uneasy, as though holding a man who had defied death twice was somehow dangerous. Nathan's legs nearly buckled when the gates to the inner chambers closed, but he forced himself upright. The warrior woman awaited him again, her expression unreadable as the guards presented him. Silence stretched heavy and suffocating. Finally she stepped forward, her voice low but resonant. Twice you were thrown to die. Twice you endured. You're no longer just a slave, Nathan Cole. She leaned closer, her eyes gleaming with something fierce. You are a problem my empire cannot ignore. Nathan met her gaze, swaying on his feet but unbroken. Then you'd better get used to me. His voice cracked, but his defiance stood tall. The woman smiled faintly, and in that moment, Nathan knew the trials ahead would only grow harder. But he also knew this. He had shaken the foundation of their empire, and nothing would ever be the same again. Nathan's body felt like a battlefield of its own. Every joint screamed, every muscle burned, and every shallow breath reminded him of wounds yet unhealed. But despite the agony, he stood, refusing the bed they offered. If they wanted to parade him as something more than a slave, he would meet them on his feet, not on his knees. That stubbornness had carried him this far, and it would carry him further still. The warrior woman appeared once more, entering the chamber with deliberate steps. The guards flanked her, but none dared to speak until she did. Her eyes glinted in the dim blue light as she regarded him, her silver gaze sharp enough to cut. "You should be dead," she said evenly. "Yet here you stand. Tell me, Nathan Cole, why do you not break?" Nathan's lips curled into something between a grimace and a smile. "Because where I come from, breaking isn't an option. We endure storms, wars, hunger. If we broke every time the world tried to kill us, humanity would have died long before you ever found us." His voice cracked, but his tone carried like steel through the chamber. Her gaze flickered, just for a heartbeat, into something like curiosity. The elder, however, was less impressed. He burst forward with a snarl, shouting accusations of defiance, of contamination. He demanded Nathan's execution, his words carrying venom that dripped with fear. Nathan saw it then, not just hatred, but fear. The old man feared what he represented. The warrior silenced the elder with a sharp gesture. "Enough," she said. Then turning to Nathan, she added, "You will fight one last time. Not for survival, for judgment. The Empire must see whether you are anomaly or omen. Tomorrow you will face the champion of the Highborn." The words struck Nathan like a hammer. The champion. Even among whispers in the cells, that name carried dread. None who had faced the champion had returned alive. It was said the champion's victories numbered in the hundreds, that no species had ever produced one to rival him. Nathan clenched his fists, forcing down the spike of fear clawing at his chest. "Then I'll face him," he said simply. That night was long and restless. Nathan sat awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the fortress. He thought of Earth, of skies he might never see again, of faces he could barely recall. He thought of the slaves who had whispered his name, their eyes sparking with hope. He thought of the warrior woman, who watched him not as prey but as puzzle. And he thought of the elder, whose hatred seemed to grow with every breath Nathan drew. When dawn came, he was ready, not rested, not healed, but ready. The guards escorted him to the Colosseum once more, and as the gates opened, the roar that met him was deafening. Tens of thousands filled the seats, their voices a storm that shook the very air. Banners flew, weapons clanged, and chants rose like thunder. This was no mere trial. This was a spectacle for the Empire itself. At the far end of the arena, the champion emerged. Massive, towering over even the armored warriors Nathan had fought before. His body was a fortress of muscle wrapped in blackened steel. His weapon was a double-bladed axe taller than Nathan himself, its edges glowing faintly with runes that shimmered with menace. The crowd erupted, their cheers shaking the ground as the champion lifted his weapon in salute. Nathan gripped the crude sword they had given him. It was better than the shard he had once held, but it was laughable against the champion's monstrosity. His chest tightened, but he forced himself to breathe. He reminded himself of the Kevlar beast, of the four warriors, of every time death had reached for him and come back empty-handed. He had endured before. He would endure again. The horn sounded. The champion moved with terrifying speed, his axe carving the air with lethal precision. Nathan dodged by a hair, the weapon smashing stone where he had stood. The ground trembled, dust rising in a choking cloud. The sheer force of the strike sent Nathan sprawling, but he rolled, barely avoiding the follow-up that would have split him in two. The crowd roared with every clash, every near miss. Nathan fought not with strength but with cunning, using the champion's size against him. He darted close when the axe swung wide, striking at joints and seams, never pausing long enough to be caught. His blade barely scratched the armor, but each cut was a message: "I will not fall." The champion bellowed in frustration, his attacks growing faster, heavier. Nathan's body screamed under the strain, his lungs burning, his legs trembling. He knew he couldn't outlast the giant forever, but he could outthink him. Humans had always been prey to larger predators, until they learned to turn cunning into survival. Seizing a moment, Nathan kicked dust into the champion's face, a move so crude the crowd gasped in outrage. The giant roared, blinded for a second, and Nathan drove his blade into the weak joint of the armor at the shoulder. The steel shrieked as it gave way, the blade sinking deep. The champion staggered, blood dark and alien spilling onto the sand. The Colosseum exploded in chaos. Half the crowd screamed in fury, the other half in awe. Nathan stood panting, his blade trembling in his grip, his chest heaving. The champion dropped to one knee. The axe still clutched in his hands, but his strength faltered. Nathan didn't finish him. He simply stood, refusing to deliver the killing blow. The warrior woman rose, her silver eyes blazing. The elder shouted furiously at her side, demanding Nathan's execution. But she raised her voice over the crowd, sharp and commanding. Enough, twice he survived. Now he has defeated our champion. He is no slave. He is no anomaly. He is proof that the Empire is not unbreakable. Gasps rippled through the arena. The elder's face twisted with rage, his fist shaking as he spat venomous words. But the crowd, divided, awestruck, could not deny what they had seen. A human, frail by their standards, had endured where none should have. Nathan's very existence had become rebellion. Guards rushed the sands surrounding him once more, but this time their grips were uncertain. Nathan stood tall, bloodied but unbowed, his eyes locked on the warrior woman. In that moment he understood. This was not just about survival anymore. This was about the Empire itself, and the fracture he had just carved into it. As they dragged him from the arena, slaves and captives pressed close to catch a glimpse, their eyes wide with something dangerous. Hope. Nathan staggered, but he lifted his chin, refusing to look beaten. They had given him no freedom, no promise, no mercy. Yet in surviving, he had taken something from them far more precious, the illusion of their invincibility. That night, as the fortress pulsed with unrest, Nathan sat in silence in his chamber, his wounds throbbing, his body spent. But his mind burned with clarity. He was no longer just Nathan Cole, a human taken in chains. He was a spark in the darkness of an empire too vast to comprehend. And sparks had a way of becoming fire. The warrior woman's words echoed in his mind as exhaustion finally claimed him. You are a problem my empire cannot ignore. He almost smiled as sleep dragged him under. For once he believed it because he was human, and humans, no matter the chains, never bowed forever.